Ever since Adriana was a little girl, she knew what she was going through. Her wife and her Uncle Betty had been relentless about it. Or Betty, as the villagers called her. Betty had a tough temper, a heavy hand, and no mercy, no compassion at all. That's why when her husband Ethan brought in his little nephew Betty, she gave him a broom on the spine. "Are you out of your mind?" she screamed, pointing her finger at little Adriana. "What do we need another girl for? We got 3 kids ourselves." "There's not enough room," the husband said judiciously, rubbing the place where the broom had hit him. "A piece from the mouth of native children you call in the ear, and do not be ashamed. Isn't it shameful to give your own blood to an orphanage?" Ethan bellowed. "And who will be after that, if you didn't take care of your sister's daughter? If you knew who your Anka had fathered a child with, you could have given it to your own father," Betty immediately remarked. But having come across a heavy frown of her husband, she waved her hand with irritation. "Oh, all right. I'll shut up. Do whatever you want." Ethan really didn't know who the father of little Adriana was. His sister had never told him. She gave birth to a baby girl without a husband, and on all questions only stubbornly silent. Eventually, the kinfolk got away from her. Anya burned out in a matter of months from cancer, and it turned out that Adriana really had no other kin left except Uncle Ethan. Her grandparents were long dead as well. So if Ethan hadn't brought her into his family, she would have ended up in an orphanage. Sometimes, though, she thought it would have been better if she had actually gone to an orphanage. Aunt Betty disliked her terribly, constantly scolded her, nagged her, and loaded her with housework, like some servant. Adriana constantly recalled the fairy tale of Cinderella. Sometimes she imagined it was written about her. Aunt Betty was not her stepmother, of course, but she behaved just the same. In addition to 2 daughters, her aunt and uncle had a son, a very nasty, unpleasant boy who annoyed Adriana more than her cousins. In general, Adriana's life was clearly not sugar. If it weren't for her uncle's protection, she'd be in a world of hurt. Fortunately, Ethan always tried to come to the aid of his niece and did not allow the household to abuse her or overburden her with excessive work at home or in the vegetable garden. Despite the rather difficult conditions, Adriana grew up a cheerful, smiling, and kind girl. She never worked, never grumbled or capricious, even if she had a hard time. A swagger, though, and she wasn't. In case of anything, she could quite well stand up for herself. She had a good tongue. She didn't let anyone insult her, whether it was her cousins, her brother, or her close-knit Aunt Betty, When Adriana turned 16, she slowly began to transform from an ugly duckling to a beautiful swan. Contour target, angular, slouching in the movements, appeared smoothness. Forms became feminine. Classmates and older boys began to look back at the girl. Around their wicket gate constantly led guys, dreaming and passing to see Adriana when she will be lost in the beds or leave the house to feed the cattle. This made the sisters incredibly angry. They themselves were not popular with the opposite sex because they were not distinguished by neither beauty, bad temper, nor folding, capricious, angry and jealous of their faces literally green with rage when they saw near the house of any regular admirer. "You're running a brothel here?" angrily whispered the girl. "It's impossible to take a step without bumping into some man. They even climb trees. And just to see a polka. What a shame. What did they see in her?" Her friend nudged her. No skin, no face. Adriana kept catching her sister's glances of envy. They appreciated her slim figure, thin waist, long legs, thick golden hair, and violet eyes. And they probably realized they were losing out to Betty, who was so beautiful. And she was desperately angry, fearing that this girl would take away all potential suitors from her daughters. In her heart, Adriana dreamed that after graduation, she would go to an institute and leave the village forever. In fact, how many relatives could be bothered with her? She is already quite a grown-up girl and quite capable of leading an independent, self-sufficient life. Adriana was not afraid of work. She could easily work part-time during her studies, even as a cleaner or technician. However, her dreams were not destined to come true. Shortly before the prom, she was suddenly followed out of the hatch by her uncle. Problems with his spine did not allow him to be on his feet for long. Even to move around the house, he needed a special stick to lean on. His uncle kept a small store that sold the most necessary products for life in the village: bread, milk, vegetables, and meat. Everyone had mostly their own, but canned goods, cereals, chocolate, and of course alcoholic beverages were preferred to take from the store. After Ethan could not, Adriana had to take over. Uncle put on, and there was no way Aunt Betty could stand behind the counter herself. As it was, she worked as a milkmaid on the local farm. The sisters were squeamish at the thought of having to work as saleswomen. There was no hope for her brother either. The only thing he was interested in was hanging out with friends, motorcycle racing, drinking, and girls. So Adriana was the only one left.
I recovered soon enough. Sickness is to blame, Uncle Ethan promised. I'm sorry. You probably wanted to go to college. The institute won't run anywhere.
Adriana waved him off, made carefree. So what if I get in next year? It's no big deal.
You, the main thing, recover. In principle, Adriana liked working in the store.
Customers loved her. She found a kind word for everyone, polite. She told in detail about the goods, advised. She never counted and willingly gave discounts to regular customers, as well as to the elderly and disabled. The premises were always crowded and cheerful. No one ever even tried to steal anything from the store. Too much respect for the young sales clerk. Adriana was the favorite of the whole village. Standing behind the counter, she deftly conducted her business, while simultaneously cracking jokes with the customers. Not once was she rude or insolent to anyone. Uncle Ethan couldn't get enough of her. Such a reliable helper. Wasn't she afraid to leave her store? Everything was going well for her. Vaporized. Except Betty, watching the girl, was getting angrier and angrier, despite the fact that Adriana actually laid out the entire business. Her husband's aunt did not feel the slightest bit of gratitude to the orphan. When a tired Adriana would return home in the evenings, Betty shamelessly burdened her with household chores, tidying up, laundry, washing, cooking. They would not harvest their own crops. One day, Adriana, exhausted after a particularly hard day's work, could not stand it, and cautiously asked Sophia and Camille, why not pick strawberries? To which Betty, shocked by such insolence, gasped with indignation. How dare you? Sophia and Camille are tired at the technical school. They can't feel their feet. Do you want me to send them to work in the garden after school? I see, Adriana grinned. Sophia and Camille are tired, but I'm friendly. Why would you be tired? Betty glittered. It's a great skill to be behind the counter all day and count other people's money. It's like a vacation. Have you been dabbling? Adriana shook her head, but didn't argue. Silently, she woke up in the shower room, picked up the bucket, and went to pick berries. Ethan, unfortunately, was not getting any better. His aching back was making itself known. He left the house less and less, and he couldn't even walk without his stick. As if he didn't have to get into a wheelchair, he once joked wryly. But Adriana even got angry with him for such pessimism. Don't you dare say that! Don't you dare even think that, Uncle Ethan! You'll be all right. But it wouldn't hurt to have a checkup in the city with some good doctors. You and I will definitely go to the city as soon as possible. You must be well. However, Adriana was never able to go to the city with her uncle. Life had decided otherwise. In a few days, her fate changed beyond recognition. That memorable morning, Adriana, as usual, came to work, opened the store and attached fresh price tags to the new products. Another day of work began. Suddenly, she saw through the window a car pull up to the front porch of the store. An unfamiliar, terribly expensive one. Not that Adriana was so good at cars, but she could tell a foreign car from a domestic one. And then, no one in their village had such cool cars. She looked curiously out the window, wondering who it was. Although, in principle, the girl was not surprised by visitors. Not far from the store, there was a highway leading to the city, and tourists, hunters, fishermen, and cottagers often came here. They bought beer, chips, dried fish potato chips, and other trifles. Out of the car steadily got out. No, not an old man. He couldn't even be called an old man, more like a gentleman. That was the association Adriana had when she looked at his noble gray hair, impeccable posture, and expensive suit. He walked as if he were the king of the land. His gaze was confident and rigid. Adriana involuntarily pulled herself up and straightened at the counter, suppressing the urge to stroke her hair with the palm of her hand and look in the mirror to see if she was all right. Or else, what else? This Irina's city gentleman will be squeamish to buy anything here. Judging by the look on his face, her hunch was not far from the truth. The gentleman stepped inside, and his face showed a range of emotions from confusion to squeamishness. I wondered what he wanted here. It was hard to imagine this noble gentleman choosing chips or seeds. One could more likely imagine him in a restaurant, gracefully devouring soup, mussels and white wine, or foie gras mousse on a breccia. "Good morning," said Adriana, stretching her lips into a polite smile. "Good morning," the man said, jerking away. "Say, do you have mineral water without gas, chilled in a sealed bottle?" "Yes, we do," nodded Adriana towards the refrigerator with drinks. "Take your pick." The gentleman began to meticulously examine the assortment behind the transparent door. Obviously, he was afraid that he'd get some kind of artisanal fake instead of mineral water. "Are your bottles sealed?" he asked suspiciously. Adriana was even a little offended. "No," she said wryly. "We take an empty one that has been used many times before and fill it with running water from the nearest swamp." The gentleman turned pale and staggered away from the fruit sour refrigerator in horror. But why can't Strawberry then suddenly shifted his gaze to the field, but asked suspiciously, "Are you joking?" "Well, of course I'm joking," sighed the girl tiredly. "Everything is fine with our bottles." "Don't worry, choose," she repeated. However, the gentleman seemed to have already lost interest in the mineral water. Instead, he stared at Adriana with frank, undisguised curiosity. "You work here, then?" he asked at last. She grinned. "You're very observant. But you're not the owner, are you?" he asked. Adriana waved her head. "The landlord is my uncle, but he's not well at the moment. So if you have any questions, you may address them directly to me." The master continued to stare at the girl, making her uncomfortable. He studied her face and figure, and although his eyes read sincere admiration, for some reason she felt uncomfortable to feel herself the object of his close male attention. "Koshliakov, softly," Adriana reminded her delicately. "So, are you going to take the water or not?" "Oh yes, of course." He seized up. "I'm sorry, I was involuntarily looking at you. Honestly, it's rare to find such natural beauty, unspoiled by plastic surgery, and all sorts of full-bodied eyelashes and tattooed new eyebrows." Adriana looked embarrassed and shrugged her shoulders. She was certainly pleased when people talked about her beauty, but something about this gentleman made her uneasy, making her wary and not relaxed. "Thank you," she thanked him discreetly, realizing that the girl was completely shy. The gentleman pointed his finger at one of the water bottles without looking. "I'll take this one for 40 cents, Adriana said. "You can't pay with cards, of course," he asked ironically. Adriana opened her mouth to say, Can you transfer the amount I need to my phone number? But she shut it immediately. For some reason, she didn't feel like watering in front of this strange, unfamiliar gentleman. My personal number. Cash only. You answered dryly. You didn't use cash, guiltily admitted the visitor, pulling out his wallet. I don't even know if I have it. Oh, I guess you're in luck. With these words, he took out a $100 bill and put it on the counter. Adriana was confused. It was early morning and she hadn't yet had time to trade for the right amount of money. I'm sorry, he muttered, and she was confused. I probably won't be able to give you change. I just don't have that much. It's nothing. The gentleman waved his hand. Keep the change. Such small things are small things. Adriana almost choked. Almost 100 cents and 40 cents. He calls it a trifle. They're so rich, these rich people don't even know the value of money. No, she resolutely refused to help her head. I can't do that. I'll let you buy something else with the rest of the money. He waved his hands. I don't need anything else. Don't worry. It's really nothing to me. I can see that, Adriana said snidely, but immediately bought her tongue. However, the visitor was not offended. On the contrary, he smiled broadly, continuing to look at Adriana with amusement and admiration. Who would have thought, he finally said, that in this backwater could bloom such a beautiful flower? It's a miracle. Excuse me, what's your name? Adriana, she mumbled. I blushed. It's amazing. You even have a name that's rare these days. Modern girls are all rich. Violetta, Adelina, Milana, Stephanie. What's your name? The girl asked me out of politeness. She had to say something in response to his fiery tirade. And I'm Michael, although you can just call me Michael, and I'm on a first-name basis. He's young, saintly. It's a pleasure, Michael, Adriana replied, stubbornly dropping her chin and emphatically calling him by his middle name. She wasn't going to call him Michael. He's found a girlfriend. He's not only her father, but her grandfather. Despite his trim figure and white teeth and smile, he's clearly got Venus teeth, not real teeth. Once again, he took no offense. On the contrary, Zalev laughed. You're a girl of character, I see. I like her independent, proud, and stubborn. At that moment, the doorbell rang, symbolizing that another customer had entered the store. It was Kathy, who lived on the same street as Ethan's family. Adriana knew her well. Hello, Kathy, the girl greeted her cheerfully. The cakes were here for the cakes. She had already learned the tastes and habits of all the regular customers. Kathy was not prone to waste and rarely appeared in the village store. She baked bread in an old Russian oven. She had her own meat and milk, butter, cheese, sour cream, and cottage cheese she made herself. And from the harvest in the garden and on the vegetable garden, Twist's preparations for the winter. But Grandma had one single weakness: cakes with whipped cream and pieces of exotic fruits. As soon as she saw them, as she said herself, she lost both will and reason. Too often to buy cakes Kathy could not afford, but still about once a week appeared in the store to buy her favorite treat. Hello, the old lady nodded stiffly, leaving the unfamiliar visitor with a fixed gaze, as if chanting, yes, that's so sweetened, want to pack me a couple of cakes? Adriana took up her order. She and her uncle ordered the cakes from the city pastry shop, and now, at the beginning of the week, they were especially fresh and tasty. She carefully placed 5 cakes in the box and handed it to Kathy. Where are you going? He waved his hands in a frightened manner. I'm not a millionaire. It's a gift from the offshore, Adriana generously announced, at the expense of the store as a regular customer. Or rather, not at the expense of the store, but at the expense of this overly generous gentleman who is used to throwing money around, she added mentally. Really? Kathy gasped. Well, thank you, Grandpa. Oh, thank you, Grandma said. I already have. Now with fresh, with jam, with sole and mint. Have a nice tea party, smiled Adriana. Come to us again. The completely happy old woman left the store one last time with Michael. The gray-haired gentleman was not going to leave. He was still standing near the counter and, with his arms folded across his chest, continued to look at Adriana. You have a good heart, but just a miracle, not a girl. He shook his head. I didn't think there were any of those left nowadays. Listen, do you have a boyfriend? Adriana blushed. Their conversation had taken an unexpected turn. I don't have a boyfriend, she muttered quietly. I don't have time for this nonsense. Michael seemed very happy to hear the news. He was about to say something, but his eyes fell on the face of the round wall clock hanging above his head. Do you have the right time? He asked. The girl nodded. Oh shit, he realized with annoyance. Business is waiting. Unfortunately, I have to leave now. But I'm sure, Adriana, that I'll see you again. Better not, she said in her mind. In spite of all his courtesy and generosity, she did not like Michael. He continued to inspire her with a vague uneasiness, almost fear. The young beauty from the village store continued to occupy Michael's thoughts, even as he sat in the restaurant negotiating with his business partners. He had his own companies successfully engaged in international trade. The whole country knew the name Michael Allen. A billionaire, a businessman, a socialite, famous for his love of girls younger than him. Despite his venerable age, there were plenty of people who wanted to have at least a short-term affair with him. The first Moscow beauties, actresses, and models literally lined up, fighting for his attention and favor. However, Michael was fastidious, not constant with
None of his young girlfriends. He did not last longer than a month. At first, he was added to this feeling of eagerness to please, the desire to serve for expensive gifts, and then it became annoying.
It was as if all of these girls had a counter in their brains. Each of them mentally calculated all the benefits of an affair with him and was agreed to everything, even if Michael said, "Get on your knees, kiss my shoes." Anyone would willingly go for it, because the generous reward compensated for all the humiliation and inconvenience. And he was terribly tired of this ingratiation. Not and fish. She was tired of everything being big. Secular beauties are corrupt and cynical to the core, Medun. They were still lucky that even in his years, Alan kept himself in great shape and still looked quite attractive and youthful. But even if he were a bald, pot-bellied, lazy, and poorly intelligent old man with dementia, the maidens would have continued to disarm him just the same, because a fortune of a few, $1,000 instantly transformed him into a young handsome man in their admiring eyes. Greedy, venal, corrupt, unscrupulous, lecherous. These are only a small part of the epithets that could award Michael. He loved modern girls only once in his life, his late wife. But he was widowed 20 years ago, and since then no woman has not been able to take in his heart a place like the one occupied by his favorite girl. So in vain all these actresses, primaries, and models sought to take a permanent place next to him, dreaming that perhaps one day he will marry her. After a couple of 3 weeks of relationship, Alan would give his next girlfriend an expensive gift. For example, a diamond necklace or a mink coat. And he did it with a pen. Of course, from time to time, a feeling of agonizing loneliness came over him. His only son had long ago gone abroad with his wife and had no intention of returning. However, a year ago, his grandson Michael came to Russia and said that he was fed up with these stupid Western realities, that he was drawn back to his homeland with a terrible force, and that he terribly misses birch kvass, black bread, and balalaika. At first, Alan rejoiced at the return of his grandson. He was not a stupid guy who had successfully distinguished himself at Harvard University. Michael decided that perhaps Nick would be his successor. It is quite possible that in the future he will give him the reins of the company. However, the young man completely disappointed him, not living up to his hopes and expectations. All Nick was interested in was partying in clubs, girls, entertainment. In general, different life without any worries and troubles. Alan was angry. Several times he tried to talk to his grandson seriously, appealed to his conscience or to his reason, but he only carelessly waved away and continued to pound away at his grandfather's money. Michael threatened to stop sponsoring him altogether, to which he replied that in that case, he would go back to America to his parents. Alan couldn't allow that to happen. No matter how foolish he was, but still his grandson was his own man and heir. He did not want to be completely alone again. When he met Adriana, something shook and changed in his soul. This girl was so different from the classic Moscow predators, hunting for rich husbands. Apparently, she had little interest in money at all. There wasn't a shred of pretense in it. Alan had learned to be a good judge of that. Many girls also pretended that they were attracted only by Michael's personality and not by his fabulous fortune. But how their eyes lit up when he hinted at expensive gifts. Adriana could not be bought. Alan approached her this way and that, trying to find out what she was interested in, what she was passionate about. If she said she liked to drive fast, he wouldn't hesitate to give her a car. If she hinted that she dreamed of traveling, he would go with her to the Maldives. If she confessed that she loved beautiful and fashionable clothes, he would take her to Paris or Rome and guide her through the boutiques of the best fashion designers and couturiers, buying her anything she wanted. But Adriana would only shrug her shoulders in confusion and reply with a low-key answer that she likes to read and watch movies. Movies? What kind of movies? He perked up. And what kind of actors do you like? I know many Russian actors and directors. And if you want, I could organize a meeting for you. No, thank you, Adriana declined. Why? I just like to watch them on the screen, and meeting them in person is unnecessary. I might be disappointed if it turns out my favorite actor isn't so great in person. Anyway, she was completely unbreakable. She refused to go on a date with Michael Adriana either, and negotiated with the fact that she has a lot of things to do in the store, at home on household chores. She did work a lot, he couldn't help but admit, but at the same time he realized that if Adriana really wanted to, she would have found an hour of time for him in her schedule. So she just didn't want to. However, Alan wasn't about to give up and give in. This girl was in his heart, and he was willing to do anything to win her favor and her heart over time. He used to visit her at the store, dropping by for a chat, but at the same time he was sure to buy some little thing that he didn't need at all. For example, or a box of chocolates, a pack of cookies, or a carton of fruit juice. Naturally, he gave it away to the first village children he met, or handed them to the servants when he got home. These purchases tried on Adriana a little with his presence. She had to make a profit, no matter how she did it. Gradually, step by step, Alan learned her simple biography, learned that she had been orphaned at an early age and had been taken in by her uncle's family, that the uncle, his wife, and their children were not too happy about Adriana living in their home, about the fact that all the housework, in fact, lies on the fragile shoulders of Adriana alone. Learned also that because of the illness of his uncle, Adriana was forced to stay in the village and not enroll in the institute. As always, dreaming the more Michael got to know her, the more he liked her. He liked her modesty, simplicity, decency. And although Adriana had not given him a word or a glance yet to realize that she liked him in her dreams, Alan already imagined that she would soon become his beloved, or maybe, what the hell, maybe even his wife. Yes, of course. He himself had always laughed at couples where the husband was several times older than the wife, when the young one was not only a daughter, but even a granddaughter. Even a fool could see that it was pure calculation on the part of the bride. but not in the case of Adriana. With her, Alan could be 100% sure that she did not need his money at all, except that she didn't. With or without money, she didn't need him either. But Michael was used to achieving his goals at any cost. It was thanks to his persistence that he reached such heights in business, earning his fabulous wealth. He had no doubt that sooner or later the fortress would fall and Adriana would agree to marry him. He just had to prepare her well. In his dreams of the young country beauty, Alan had loosened his grip on his grandson a little, stopped keeping track of what time he left home and when he returned, and stopped making remarks about his idle lifestyle. He no longer insisted that Nick should get his mind right and finally get to work. At first, the young man rejoiced at the sudden freedom that suddenly fell on him. You can have all the fun you want, and no one is standing here over your head, not lecturing you. However, after a couple of weeks, Nick began to worry, not understanding why his grandfather completely gave up on him. That evening at dinner, the guy mentioned in passing that he needed to upgrade his car, and that it would be good if his grandfather gave him some money for it. You'll get by. The old man shook his head. Your car was only bought 2 years ago. It hasn't had time to age or break down yet. Nick pouted, but didn't dare to argue, realizing that the requests were indeed too expensive. But then just slightly increase the amount of money you give me for the week, he asked. Honestly, I don't have enough for my essential expenses either. Everything's gotten so expensive. Spend less, Alan said calmly. You'll have enough for everything. I pay you a pretty good amount of money every week. A lot of people in my company don't make that much in a month. You're drunk. Well, you've gotten so old. Maia will find you. I don't recognize you. I just know the value of money because I personally earned every penny of it, objected Alan. When you start working, you'll understand. Work did not make a bored face. I'm not drawn to it at all. Honest. And if you continue to be like this with theft, I think I'll go back to my parents in the United States. I've got a fishing pole. In fact, of course, nobody was going anywhere. He was doing just fine in Russia. His parents were also quite wealthy people, but still they could not provide him with such a standard of living as his grandfather did, saying that he would leave. He was just bluffing, scaring the old man. However, contrary to expectations, this time the grandfather was not frightened. He said in an even voice, "If you really decide to return to America, I will not hold you back. It's up to you to choose where and with whom you feel comfortable." Ha, that was new. Nick pulled his eyes away in amazement. You always said that I was your only joy and comfort, that if I weren't here, you'd go crazy with longing and loneliness. I did. Alan nodded. No stranger to it. Lying then, Irene. Grandfather shook his head. My decision to marry and Balamonst considered is not a spontaneous impulse, but what I really want with all my heart. His grandson clutched his head and began to pace the living room floor nervously. No, this is unthinkable, he exclaimed. I thought you were a reasonable, self-critical person. But don't you see that this person only wants your money from you? You don't know her at all to make such categorical conclusions, shook his head. Believe me, Adriana is not like that. My money is the last thing on her mind. Yeah, grinned the grandson skeptically. It's old news, but it's hard to believe. If you don't want to believe it, don't believe it. Alan shrugged. After all, I don't have to answer to you about my personal life. Oh, if I want to get married, I don't have to ask anyone's permission, whether you like it or not. If something doesn't suit you, he's inquisitive, reconciled, then I don't keep you. That's where the grandson got really scared. It seems that the unknown girl has an on a joke turned grandfather's head. He might actually marry her, and then he'll sign over his inheritance to her. And he, Nick, would be left with nothing. No, he couldn't let that happen. Then he decided to act more cunningly and diplomatically. He shouldn't make an enemy out of his grandfather, but pretend to be his ally and try to find out as many details as possible. I don't require you to ask my permission. Nick smiled peacefully. If you're so driven to get married, go ahead and get married. Is she pregnant? It suddenly hit him? Why, that would explain a lot of things, including the strange rush. But Alan shook his head negatively. No, come on. Adriana and I don't have that kind of relationship yet. Nick was speechless again for a moment. So, this girl had not even allowed her grandfather to see her body yet. But she's not unreasonable, because inaccessibility and resistance tends to ignite interest even more. It seems that this inheritance hunter was an experienced predator, a real shark. And who is she? Nick asked. How could one be careless? Some model, socialite, popular blogger. Maybe I know her. It was not out of the question, since he was a regular at the most fashionable and expensive nightclubs, restaurants, and parties. The grandfather, however, was once again shaking his head. No, you don't. That girl is not from our circle. Nick raised his eyebrows. Well, what circle is she? Not Frosha from the village? Ironically, he clarified. However, to his great surprise, the grandfather nodded. He had almost guessed. Adriana does live in the village. She is a simple girl. It wasn't hard to keep himself from saying what he thought about all this. It looks like Grandpa really is crazy, even though he denies it. Getting involved with a redneck. That's normal. Where did you find her? Nick almost said dug her up, but he held back and corrected himself. Where did you pick her up? I met Adriana at the store, driving by. I was thirsty. I didn't bring any water. So I went in and got some. And there she was behind the counter. Grandpa smiled dreamily and looked like an old fool. Of course, he said nothing of the sort. What kind of store? He asked. The one before the leaf turn, by the highway. It's the only one there. The village was on the other side of the river. It was an elite cottage village, where his grandfather and his kind of rich people lived. Nick had a good idea of where it was and where the store was located. Figured it out roughly, too. Perhaps, he thought, I should go there secretly from his grandfather. Find out what kind of clever people are rolling their lips over our money. If it's necessary to scare, to teach, to put in place, just so that this bitch would leave grandfather in peace. You see everything with her every day? Asked Nick with ostentatious indifference. Grandfather regretfully spread his hands. I would like to, but alas, no. I also have to do business. I have to go to the office. Today, for example, we are meeting a very important Korean delegation of our potential partners. So, most likely, I'll spend the whole day at work without seeing him. Look visibly blushed. It's okay, Nick consoled. You'll see him tomorrow. I can't wait till tomorrow. Grandpa grinned and winked at his grandson. Winking at his grandson, it seems that love really did wonders with him. He even visually became 20 years younger. Well, Nick thought. As soon as Grandpa goes to the office to meet his Koreans, I'm going to go to the Leaf, to that very store, to meet my future grandmother. He couldn't stand it and chuckled at his thoughts. What made you so cheerful? Grandpa asked suspiciously. I'm just happy for you. Nick lied without blinking an eye. I'd forgotten when I'd experienced such a revelatory feeling of love myself. Which one of us is the old man? Did his grandfather playfully fake it? Yeah, Nick sighed. You're a good boy, young. I'm envious. He barely waited for his grandfather to leave. As soon as his car was out of the gate and out of sight, Nick went to his room, quickly changed clothes, and also jumped out of the house. He found the store at once. In fact, it was the only one near the highway before the turnoff. Even from the outside, it looked shabby. And before he went in, Nick pursed his lips in a contemptuous sneer. Yeah, the kind of hot spots his grandfather dragged him to. Who'd have thought it? As he entered, the girl sitting behind the counter reading a book looked up. Nick's gaze met the girl's, and he felt his breath catching and his heart going down. The girl was beautiful, and not just beautiful, damn beautiful. And it was not a dull, glossy beauty, but real, pure, sincere, and fresh, like a long spring. Thick hair with a golden waterfall scattered over her shoulders. There was not a gram of makeup on her face. Huge violets in her eyes looked openly and trustingly. I can see now why Grandpa was instantly blown away. Good morning, she said hello. What can I do for you? Nick clapped noisily with excitement, forgetting all the words he was going to say to her. Adriana, meanwhile, was also involuntarily admiring the young man. She had never seen such a handsome man before. They didn't have them in the village. Fancy hair, strong chin, gray eyes with long eyelashes, slim athletic figure, stylish, obviously expensive clothes. Adriana stared at him, with her mouth slightly open, completely oblivious to her direct duties. Nick under first. Good morning. He threw her a careless tone. So, you are the Adriana? The girl flared up involuntarily. Why do you address me as you? What do you mean, the one? She clarified. Oh, I'm sorry, Your Highness, for daring to address you in a manner inconsistent with your high status. Nick began to wiggle. In fact, he did not want to insult the girl. But if he decided to bring it to the end, he had to act. I don't understand. Her face became resentful, like a child's. Nick involuntarily felt anger rising from the bottom of his soul. Probably this is how she enfools the heads of visiting millionaires, makes an innocent face, pouting her lips and flapping her beautiful eyes. How can you resist? Do not accept? He asked sarcastically. Does the name Michael Allen mean anything to you? Adriana's eyes flashed a glimmer of understanding. Michael? She asked. Of course it does. He's been coming here a lot lately. What's the matter? Something's happened to him. Nick was getting more and more annoyed as he looked at her. Wasn't she disgusted with herself? Young, fresh, handsome. Hooking up with an old man? Did she have nothing sacred in her soul? What's the matter? He smirked. Can't you guess it yourself? As a relative of Michael, I'm a little shocked at his plans to marry the village sales clerk. Adriana froze confusedly. Married to? Wait, who are you referring to now? Me? It suddenly hit her. Bingo! He exclaimed with a mocking expression. But you have a talent for acting. Acting surprised so convincingly. Wait a minute, Adriana grumbled. Screwed up his head and squeezed his temples with his fingers. I don't understand anything. Do you mean that Michael wants to ask for my hand? What else hasn't he asked for? Nick joined in incredulously. Adriana shook her head fearfully. No, this is the first I've heard of it. It looked like she wasn't lying. She looked completely dumbfounded. Nick softened a little. You don't look very happy about it. He glared. Who? She turned toward him, glad. Are you kidding me? It's utter nonsense. What you just told me about getting married. Why would he think that? Why did he think for 1 second that I would agree to it? Her indignation seemed perfectly genuine. So you don't like my grandfather? Nick clarified. Adriana splayed out her hands. But of course I don't love him. And we hardly know him at all. He's a complete stranger to me. Yeah, see, he stops by our store from time to time, but frankly, his visits stress me out more than they make me happy. He gives me these weird looks all the time. I mean, would I have thought that he already has a mental picture of me as his fiancé? I mean, if he offered it to you outright, would you say no? Nick asked. Of course I would, Adriana exclaimed indignantly. The last thing in the world I want is to be his wife. And you. And who are you exactly? And why are you telling me all this? He didn't feel his fighting spirit leaving him, and he didn't want to quarrel with the girl and attack her anymore. I'm his grandson, he finally admitted. And as you probably realize, I'm not thrilled to hear that he's going to marry you. The girl shrewdly squinted Vasya. I guess you decided that I myself promoted him to marriage, because you want to get after his fortune? She smirked. Nick snorted guiltily. Well, what else would I have thought? Plant yourself. He's old, though he's in great shape. And you're young?
He hesitated for a moment. Beautiful. Adriana lowered her eyelashes in embarrassment. You don't have to worry, she said quietly. Your grandfather's condition is in no danger.
At least not from my side. So sleep well. Nick involuntarily admired her counters, and Shy smiled. It looked like he wouldn't be able to sleep well, because he wouldn't be able to forget this beauty so easily. Adriana, do you have a boyfriend? He asked suddenly, even to himself. She shook her head. No. Why do you ask? Because I haven't gotten my act together. Because I want to ask you out.
Adriana was confused, and at the same time he was ready to swear to it. Overjoyed, her face brightened. Her eyes flashed, yet she immediately. Are you laughing at me? The girl asked suspiciously. Why would someone like you ask someone like me out on a date? Are you doing this to spite your grandfather? Do you want him to be convinced that with me, he will not be able to do anything? So that he'll be disappointed in me and think I'm a girl of easy virtue. You've got a knack for wit and insight, Nick grinned. Believe me, if other ways didn't work, I would have done exactly that. I'd try to get you away from your grandfather to expose him to your sleazy, corrupt nature. He laughed a little strained, but now I swear there is no subtext or double bottom in my invitation. I'm asking you out because I really like you. But so are you going to go? And the few moments while he waited for an answer seemed like an eternity to him. If Adriana had said no, it would have broken his heart and dealt a tangible blow to his ego. Luckily for him, however, she hesitantly raised a timid gaze at him and nodded. All right, I agree. That's how their fast-paced, passionate romance spun. Nico himself did not expect that he would lose his head so much from a simple village girl. At first, it seemed to him that after a couple of 3 dates, having achieved his goal, he would lose interest in Adriana and quickly cool down. But in fact, it turned out that with each new meeting, he more and more fascinated with the girl. Why be deceitful? He was up to his ears in theory. He wanted to spend time with Adriana all the time, to be near her, to look into her beautiful violet eyes, to kiss her soft, trusting lips. He would miss her within 5 minutes of breaking up. Adriana paid him back in kind. It was evident that the girl was truly in love. She looked into his eyes with such awe, so caught his every word, so laughed at his jokes, that he was ready to beat himself to death just to make her smile again and again. One thing marred his happiness. He had to hide this relationship from his grandfather. Of course, he did not realize that sooner or later he would find out, but he delayed this moment as long as he could. I realized that the old man would not be happy. What's there to say? He would be furious, but the feeling for Adriana was so strong and all-consuming that Nick was not going to give up the girl. Yes, a grandfather would be unhappy when he found out, but he would have to accept it, no matter how much he loves Adriana. Adriana loves him. Grandpa can't stop them from seeing each other, can he? Or can he? Late one night, Alan showed up home in a bad mood, not to sit in his room. But the way his grandfather yelled at the front door could be heard even on the second floor.
Nick looked out of the room and cautiously went downstairs. Grandpa was standing at the bar, pouring something strong into a glass. Wow, the grandson whistled. What are we celebrating? Angrily, Ziryanov, at him spitefully.
Michael valeted and dried glasses immediately on himself new. Wow, you take it easy. Grandfather, warning shields, said Nick. Not a boy after all. Something's already happened. Something's happened. A torn leaf spit out the grandfather.
It's happened! She's found herself some young holic. Nick walked around, immediately realizing who he was talking about, but just in case, he pretended not to understand. Who's found herself a holic? Who? Adriana, of course, my future wife. Grandson carefully took a breath and about the purse. That's it? Does she even know that you consider her your future wife? Maybe she has other plans for her life? What plans? Please! Alan brushed it off with annoyance. She's not stupid? She can't help realizing that I'm the best match for her. She'll live with me like she's living under Christ's thumb. I'll provide for her. I will spoil her. Carry her in my arms. Wait! The grandson interrupted his outpouring. You forgot about the main thing about love. As far as I understand, Adriana doesn't love you. She doesn't love you now, but she will love you later. Grandfather snapped at her.
He was literally shaking with anger. What does it matter? It matters a lot, Nick argued. If, as you say, she's found someone else, she's probably in love with him, not you.
I'm afraid you don't stand a chance. In love with someone else? Angrily, before his grandfather teased him in a venomous tone. How can she be in love, you fool? What could she possibly know about love? About true love? Aiko couldn't hold back an ironic chuckle. So you think that only you are the only one who can truly love? You don't even think that Adriana has met a young man who is worthy in every way? Come on, grandfather waved it away with annoyance and drained the second glass. Worthy, huh? All his dignity is in his pants. And where normal people have a brain, he's probably got biceps. How do you know that didn't hurt? What if he's a really nice guy? What if he's the one Adriana would be happy with? What are you getting at? Alan was furious. Whose side are you even on right now? Mine or that young bastard's? But he didn't hesitate, not knowing what was best to answer. Maybe fate was throwing him a chance to explain himself. Why? Maybe it's the right moment. Now he'd have to dot all the I's and say that he was the young bastard Adriana was in love with. Grandpa will be shocked, Hakor? Of course, but yelling at first isn't without it. But won't he kill him in the end? Or will he kill him after all? Nick opened his mouth to confess. But Alan interrupted him. We need to find out who this guy is. I'm gonna lie to him. I won't leave a mark on him. I kicked him out of town? No, out of the country, so he'll never come within 1,000 kilometers of my Adriana. I'll give him his whole left face and labor. Nick involuntarily shuddered. However, the old man was quite serious. And you're ready to maim, mutilate an innocent guy just because Adriana chose him over you? He asked in horror. The grandfather looked at his grandson. Hellfire danced in his eyes. It was the first time Nick had seen him like that, and he was truly creeped out. No choice is out of the question. He cut him off. It was me, not her, who made the choice. I'm the one dictating the rules in this game. Adriana will be mine. Period. And any obstacle in my way, be it circumstance or living person, any obstacle I will destroy. Destroy how? Nick asked quietly. Grandfather grinned wickedly. If necessary, even physically. I will not give in to anything. To not feel that he was spiked with cold sweat. It seems that the old man has gone completely mad with love for Adriana. Only it's not love anymore. It's more like obsession. And Grandpa's eyes are burning with a maniacal glow. He realized that right now, It was definitely not worth it to confess to his grandfather that he was Adriana's mysterious lover. As long as Alan is alive, he will not allow this relationship. He's more likely to get his grandson out of the house. Thank you if he doesn't maim and disfigure him like he threatened. Huh. No. You can't count on understanding and melting somewhere in time. I'm going to my place, Nick said hoarsely. Grandpa nodded without looking at him and poured himself another shot of alcohol. The grandson went up to his room on the second floor, locked the door, and immediately dialed Adriana's number. She answered immediately,
as if she had been expecting his call. Michael was at my store today. She whispered hurriedly into the phone. He started talking about his love again, about our marriage. I couldn't stand it and told him I would never marry him,
that I loved someone else. You can't imagine what happened. What happened to him? He was so mad, he almost trashed half the merchandise in the store. Then he paid for the spa damage, but still her voice was pitiful. Nick, I'm really scared. I've never seen him like this before. I felt like he could really kill me in that state. What if he found out who I meant? What if he does something to you? Her voice was literally ringing with tension. Yay, he's home right now. Completely out of control with anger, Nick confirmed quietly. I've never seen him like that either. He will never accept our relationship. It looked like Adriana was about to cry in despair. Nick's heart squeezed with pity and love for her. Don't worry, baby. We'll figure something out, he said in an exaggeratedly cheerful tone. The main thing is to trust me. I will never leave you or give up on you for any money. I want to be with you for the rest of my life. I love you, me too. Sobbing. Adriana. Nick, I love you very, very much. But I'm afraid your grandfather will never accept our happiness. He'll never let us live. If we're in his sight, he won't, Nick agreed. But if you and I are far away across the ocean, there was a tense silence for a few seconds. What do you mean? Adriana asked hesitantly. Nick's fingers ached, clenching his cell phone. The solution came to his mind instantly, so simple and obvious that he even wondered why he hadn't thought of it before. We're going to America, he blurted out. I've spent most of my life there. Everything is familiar? Everything is familiar to me. My parents live there. To America, Adriana gasped. But for me, it's a completely foreign country, like another planet. What would I do there? I couldn't do it. I don't even know English. Don't worry, you'll get used to it, Nick said with conviction. The main thing is that we'll be together. You won't be alone there. I'll always be with you. Gradually, you will learn the language, and we will get married, and you will become my wife. Do you want that? More than anything in the world. Adriana exhaled. Well, that's fine. Nick felt as if a huge stone had fallen from his soul. Then, let's start packing immediately. First, you need to get an American visa. I'll help you. What are you talking about, Nick? I don't even have a passport. The girl gasped. He frowned for a moment, but immediately nailed himself. Trifles to her, this nonsense. My friend is the son of the head of the Ministry of Internal Affairs. Then let's start the paperwork. Tomorrow I'll pick you up early and we'll do your passport and then the visas. Adriana was depressed, silent. I did not realize that the girl is not on a joke, excited and frightened by the coming changes in her life. Don't be afraid, sweetheart, he said gently. I'm with you. Everything is going to be all right. We're together. And I'll never, ever let you down. Formalization of documents, even with a blat, took about a couple of weeks. All this time, the lovers had to be extremely careful not to let Alan suspect anything. Sometimes, it seemed that the grandfather had figured them out. Very suspicious and strange look took his grandson in the evenings at dinner. What's wrong? Nick, unable to bear it, asked him bluntly one day. But Alan only looked away and grinned crookedly. Everything is all right. And Adriana, he never spoke again. And Nick himself, of course, did not ask. But his grandfather's silence inspired hope. What if the old man himself had already given up his crazy idea of marrying a young beauty? He and Adriana were slowly preparing to leave, translating the necessary certificates and documents that might be useful to her in America. Nico practiced a little English with the girl, at least conversational English so she wouldn't feel like she was abroad. Deaf and dumb. Adriana turned out to be a very capable student, grasping literally on the fly. Nick could only admire her intelligence and cleverness, as well as her willingness to learn. They decided to take almost nothing with them. Firstly, everything will be able to buy quietly later in America. And secondly, suitcases will only attract unnecessary
Attention, huh? On the eve of the day of departure, Adriana and Nick could not sleep a wink with excitement. Everyone at home in front of their relatives pretended that nothing was going on. At 04R, Adriana was supposed to quietly slip out of the house with the documents, and Nick would be waiting for her outside in a cab that would take them to the airport.
Adriana was a little embarrassed that she hadn't told the housemates about her departure. But Aunt Betty was fine. So were her nasty daughters and son. After all, she'd never been particularly close to them. Uncle Ethan, on the other hand, was a real embarrassment to her. He was the only one in the family who had always been kind to her. But Adriana realized she shouldn't have told her plans in advance. It might somehow reach Michael's ears. She decided that she would call her uncle from the airport just before boarding the plane. At exactly 4:00, clutching her bag, with her passport and documents to her chest, Adriana quietly slipped out the door and found herself on the street. There was indeed a cab waiting for her around the corner of the house. She ducked into the saloons, relieved to be in the arms of her lover. Nick. "I'm so worried," she admitted. "Do you think we're going to make it?" "We won't be interrupted." And Nick laughed lightheartedly, pulling the girl close to him. "Who could get in our way?" "The kids. They're out without their hind legs. He didn't even hear me leave the house. Yours, I hope, didn't notice anything either." Adriana shrugged. "I don't think so. That's fine. It's gonna be okay." Nervous trembling. It continued to hit Adriana at the airport as well. For the first time in her life, she was about to fly on an airplane. And to where? To America itself. They had checked in online in advance, and that they didn't have any luggage with them. So soon they found themselves at the passport control. "You go first," Adriana asked shyly. "I'll follow you." "I'm afraid I don't know what to do, what to say." "Silly," he laughed. Suitcases her on the cheek. But good. He passed through the control rather quickly and found himself on the other side, waving to Adriana with an inviting gesture, saying, "Go ahead." She stepped to the bedroom, to the window, and handed the border guard her passport. He scrutinized it carefully, checking it against his computer records, and then looked up and looked at Adriana with a strange curiosity. She felt uneasy. At that time, the border guard picked up the phone and called someone. Adriana didn't like it even more. Why so much trouble? Nick had gotten through the whole thing in a couple minutes. Maybe it's because it's her first time abroad? Another uniformed officer came over, the one who had checked Adriana's passport and visa. He said something softly in his ear, and he too shot Adriana a curious look. "Adriana Sergovna Olenikova?" asked the other. "Yes," nodded confusedly. "And she doesn't understand anything anymore. Why is he asking? In the passport, everything is specified. Or does he think it's a fake document?" A cold sweat involuntarily ran through her, although the girl's conscience was clear. "Come with me for a while," suggested the second one. "What's that for?" Adriana immediately tensed up and looked helplessly back at Nick. Come on, don't worry," he smiled broadly. "It's just a formality. a matter of a couple of minutes. She looked again for Nick, who was anxiously watching the unfolding scene from the other side. A couple of minutes, the officer repeated loudly, with a smile, addressing Nick already. Adriana followed the border guard, feeling her knees trembling. They can't just stop her from coming to America. They can't. On what grounds? Her passport and visas are in order. The officer opened the door of one of the offices and made an inviting gesture with his hand. Please, Adriana obediently stepped inside. By inertia, she took a couple more steps and was stunned. In the middle of the office stood, clearly waiting for her, none other than Michael Allen, in person. Everything that happened next, Adriana remembered vaguely, like some visceral nightmare. Refusing to believe that it had actually happened to her, she seemed to try to escape. She was immediately grabbed tightly and twisted around, unable to take a single step. She seemed to be screaming, squealing, biting, and disintegrating as she tried to break free. Michael watched her hysterics with cold calmness, and even with some satisfaction. Did you think you could get your head around it? Naive girl, he said regretfully, shaking his head. You've got the wrong man, and my grandson. Honestly, I didn't expect him to be so stupid. He really believed I wouldn't find out about anything. Yee, putting a tracker in his car and bugging his phone was a piece of hook. To tell you the truth, I hated to find out that my own grandson had done that to me. Trying to take my girlfriend away from me. I'm not your girlfriend, never have been and never will be. Adriana shouted thoughtfully. He shook his head, looking at her almost regretfully. You will be. And not just a girl, but a wife? What are you talking about? She was angry. We are not in the East in the Middle Ages, how to force someone to marry. I'll never marry you voluntarily. And anyway, Nick will come for me now. He won't. The old man shook his head again. I've taken care of that. Adriana plowed the case. Huh? What have you done to him? Nothing much. It's just that my people are now explaining to him lucidly to fly to America alone. If he does not do so, having decided to stay in Russia, he will go straight to prison. For what? Mumbled Adriana in a moment in a hoarse voice. For stealing a large sum of money from my safe. Bullshit. She exhaled. That's just nonsense. Nick didn't take your money. Maybe he didn't. The old man grinned. But they can easily prove otherwise in court. The amount of money is such that your precious Nick will sag for several years. Did you take that money out of the safe yourself? Suddenly, Adriana took it out and hid it. Blamed your own grandson. You're a scary man. He smiled. He seemed only amused by her gauntness. I'm not scary. Call it determination. I always go after what I want. And the only thing I want at the moment is you. Nothing and no one can stop me. Adriana backed away in horror, looking at Alan like a monster. But Nick isn't a stranger. He's your only grandson. Are you ready to put him in jail? Alan's voice became hard. He was a grandson exactly until he started claiming you. Something that belongs to me and only me. Even if you force Nick to fly to America without me, I still won't stay with you. There's no way I'll marry you. Deep, he laughed. Otherwise, your family will be in jail. What do you mean? The girl's voice had completely given up. She was practically whispering. They also took from me a large sum of money for your uncle's treatment for the new store. If you refuse to marry me, it will be just as easy for me to prove that they stole that money from me. Have you already managed to entangle my family with your nets too? Looking at him with disgust, Adriana said, You nasty old spider! Well, if I am a spider, then you are a fly that will soon be in my web? Alan smiled contentedly. Understand, silly. You have to marry me. Otherwise, your loved ones will suffer. Are you trapped? The wedding preparations passed like a blur. Adriana did nothing but cry. It seemed wild to her that all this was happening in reality, and yet she couldn't do anything about it, couldn't change anything. One day, she dropped in on Uncle Ethan to tell him in her heart what she thought of him. "I had no idea that you were ready to sell your own niece to an old man," Adriana said bitterly. "I thought, Uncle Ethan, that you loved me at least a little." "Sweetheart, believe me, I had nothing to do with it," he said in a voice full of pain. "Could I do that to you? It's all in the ear." Lowering his voice, he informed her. "When she heard the sum Alan had offered us, her mind went completely blank. I tried to stop her, but no way. And now he's got us all on the hook." "He's got me on the hook!" Adriana cried. "I'm the one who has to marry him, and I can't even go to the police, because he's got it all covered." "Can't you be patient, baby?" Uncle Ethan asked in despair. "He's old, but you'll live with him for a couple of years, and then he'll be dead anyway." "For me, even one night with someone I don't love is like death," Adriana said flatly. "I can't imagine being with him for years." "What are you going to do?" Uncle Ethan asked cautiously. "I don't know," Adriana gasped tiredly. "I haven't figured it out yet." Alan ordered a wedding dress to be made for her. It's the finest woods in the capital. He sent out invitations to hundreds of guests, hired famous chefs, rented a luxurious hall for the wedding party. Adriana was not happy about anything. She didn't react at all to what was going on around her. Obediently, like a doll, she went to the fitting. But all this wedding fuss didn't affect her at all. There wasn't a moment when she wasn't thinking about Nick. Her heart ached for him. She didn't even know where he was in America, whether he had arrived safely. She could not call him because Alan strictly controlled all her calls, as long as he was all right. The girl thought anxiously, as long as Alan did not send him to prison, as he threatened. She didn't remember the wedding itself. She was constantly approached by some strangers, smartly dressed people, congratulated her and her. Husband said compliments, but she just stood there with a stone face. Finally, her newly married husband elbowed her in the side and walked through, gritting his teeth. "Try to at least, for the sake of decency, to portray that you are happy with the wrong one, with a sour face, as if you had eaten lemons." More than anything else, Adriana was dreading her wedding night. She was disgusted at the very thought of going to bed with an old man. She felt sick the second she did. Was there really no escape? Finally, the wedding party was over. The guests departed, and the newlyweds arrived at their luxurious mansion. "Let's go up to our bedroom," rubbing his hands together, ordered the husband. "Undress and wait for me there. I'll be right there." Adriana walked slowly, as if to the slaughter, up the stairs. What to do? What to do? What to do? The mimosa dots pounded feverishly in her temples. "I won't let him touch me." Firmly decided at last, the girl. "I just won't let him touch me. I'll try to explain it humanly. But if he dares to come near me..." Her gaze fell. On the open window. "I just jumped down. Better death or disability than this." After Adriana made her decision, then she even felt relieved. Indeed, no one would dare to force her. She would rather die but not submit to the will of a nasty old man. Finally, she heard footsteps outside the door. Adriana tensed and frantically retreated to the open window. A satisfied Michael entered the bedroom and looked around the bed, strewn with rose petals, anticipating with a searching gaze. "Where's my darling foot?" "It's about a muzzle and a clone." "Gosh, why aren't you in bed yet? What are you doing there?" He found Adriana by the window. The girl jumped up on the sill. "Stay back," she shouted. "Will you take a step?" And I jumped. Alan turned pale. "What did you think you were, stupid?" Immediately in tears, he tried to take a step in her direction, but Adriana, cautioning, still stuck one foot out of the window, showing that she was ready to jump. "Stop!" shrieked Alan, clutching at his heart. You could fall, you could crash. My house has very high ceilings. The second floor here is like the fourth floor. I'll smash it, Adriana said bravely. But you'll be spared. I hate ya, you disgusting old man. He shook his head. Don't say that. Lenochka is no meaner than I am. And that she is stroppy, she objected. You won't do anything to me, and you will. You can't. You've lost. I'll never stay with you. And then everything began to resemble a bad dream. Alan suddenly wheezed. His face turned purple. He began to gulp for air, and then he fell to the floor and lay motionless. Hey! Adriana called out fearfully, watching him from the windowsill. What's wrong? The old man didn't answer. Should I call an ambulance? She said hesitantly. Alan remained silent and unmoving. At that moment, there was a sudden noise and a rumble outside the door. And a second later, a blink of an eye came into the room. Adriana shrieked with surprise, and her foot almost slipped down from the windowsill. But the next book had already bridged the distance between Adriana and himself, and with a huge leap, he was at the window. Another moment, and he picked up the girl in his arms, not letting her fall. Nick! She couldn't stand it and cried, Did you come? You didn't go to America. But of course you didn't. The little girl, clasping the girl to her. The young man covered her face with short, hot kisses. Could I have left you to that old doctor? There's something wrong with him, by the way. Adriana gingerly rolled onto the floor over Nick's shoulder. I think we should call a doctor. The team arrived and pronounced him dead. It turned out that Alan had overdosed on male enhancement pills. With his weak heart, the dose he'd taken on the eve of his wedding night had been fatal, and then he got overexcited when he saw the newlyweds at the window. Anyway, his heart gave out. It would be an exaggeration to say that the young wife grieved for the untimely deceased husband. The same was true for the grandson. At his grandfather's funeral, he did not shed a tear. Oh, in fact, why be sly? The young people experienced a sense of tremendous relief when Michael was gone. Their happiness was no longer threatened, No one stood in their way. A few days later, Alan's lawyer called both Adriana and Nick for the reading of the will as next of kin. But I certainly have nothing to catch, grinned the grandson. As soon as my grandfather recognized my feelings for you, he probably disinherited me without leaving me a penny. To hell with it, his money. I'll work. I'll get smart. I'm going to provide for our family on my own. Adriana, do you believe me? Of course I believe you. She smiled tenderly at her lover. I didn't fall in love with you for money. Even if you were a beggar, I would still stay with you. However, the main surprise awaited them ahead. It turned out that for all his huge fortune, Alan, shortly before the wedding, managed to write her, Adriana, then still a future wife. Thus, the girl overnight became one of the richest widows in the country. There you go, Nick joked. Now I'm no match for you. You're so rich. And I'm still a nobody. Fool. Adriana laughed, throwing herself around his neck. Hey, I told you that I would love you, even if you were a beggar. And I don't want his inheritance. Honestly, I don't. It won't make us happy. Let's spend it for charity, for sick children, or old people. And Nick gladly supported his bride's idea. Betty, of course, whispered with anger when she learned that Adriana had not only not gotten the old man, but had also snatched up a handsome young husband. Her daughters wore cheap old ones because they had a very cohesive character. But Uncle Ethan got on his feet, expanded his business, opening a new big store in town, and filed for divorce. I don't want to be the woman who sold my niece in cold blood to an old goat, he declared. Uncle Ethan invited Nick to be the manager of his new store. The young man was really eager to work and learn new things. So things got better for all of them very soon. And Adriana was going to enter the institute, but she had to postpone it for another year. because soon an addition to their young, happy family was expected. Adriana had never been so happy in her life, and knew that this was only the beginning, because her beloved husband had firmly promised her